The pounding at my door didn't sound like a polite knock. It was the kind of pounding that rattled picture frames on the wall, the kind that makes you wonder if someone's about to break the door down. I glanced at the clock, 7:02 a.m. on a Saturday. Not a delivery, not a neighbor, not even the mailman. My instincts sharpened instantly. Years of training had conditioned me to snap awake at the smallest disturbance. But this wasn't just a disturbance. This was deliberate, forceful, and loud. I got up, slid on a t-shirt, and approached the door with caution. Through the peephole I saw them, 3 men standing in a loose triangle formation on my porch. My first thought was, who the hell are these clowns? Their uniforms, or rather, attempts at uniforms, looked like they'd been assembled by 3 guys who raided a thrift store. After a late-night beer run, the one in the middle had some kind of navy blue shirt with a crooked plastic badge clipped onto his chest. I could practically read the Made in China stamp from where I stood. His pants were khaki cargos, baggy enough to hide half a tool shed, and his belt sagged under the weight of what looked suspiciously like a dollar store flashlight. He was clearly trying to look like the leader, puffing out his chest and squaring his shoulders. The second guy, standing to his left, was rocking a pair of aviator sunglasses that were so oversized they made him look like a fly. The lenses were tinted a shade of brown that didn't even match. His shirt had security printed across it, but it was faded and peeling like it had been through the wash too many times. His posture screamed wannabe tough guy, the kind of dude who probably watched too many cop shows and thought this was his big moment. The third one, clipboard guy. He was holding it like it was a sacred artifact, gripping the edges tightly as though he feared someone might snatch it from him. He had a cheap baseball cap pulled low over his face, his t-shirt tucked into his jeans in a way that made me think he'd never tucked in a shirt before, and his sneakers were untied. Every so often he glanced at his clipboard, then back at my door, as if he was rehearsing some grand announcement. They were a sight to behold. Not intimidating, not professional, just ridiculous. But the thing that struck me most was their expressions. They weren't joking. They weren't there for a prank or some harmless neighborhood shenanigans. They had this smug, self-righteous look plastered across their faces, like they were about to deliver divine justice to the most evil man on earth. I opened the door slowly, deliberately, letting the morning air drift in as I stood there. My voice was calm when I asked, "Can I help you?" The leader stepped forward, planting his boots firmly on the welcome mat. And with the confidence of someone who had absolutely no clue what they were doing, he announced, "By order of the Homeowners Association Police Department, you are under arrest. I swear to God for a split second. I thought I was still half asleep and dreaming. I blinked once, twice. Then I looked past him, scanning the driveway and street, expecting maybe a camera crew to pop out and yell, "Gotcha! You're on some new prank show." But there was no one. Just these 3 idiots standing there, fully convinced they were the real deal. "Arrest?" I repeated, my tone flat. "Yes," clipboard guy chimed in, holding his clipboard up like it was a warrant signed by the president himself. "For multiple HOA violations. We're here to take you in for questioning." His voice cracked halfway through the sentence, but he tried to recover by clearing his throat. The leader nodded. "That's right. You've ignored repeated notices. You think you can just break the rules of this community? Not on our watch. The HOA has authorized us to enforce penalties. You're coming with us." I stared at them for a moment, letting the silence stretch. Inside, I was trying not to burst out laughing. "The HOA Police Department? That wasn't even a thing. There is no such thing. The Homeowners Association barely manages to send out newsletters and argue about what color people's mailboxes can be. And now, apparently, they had a police department. With plastic badges, fake sunglasses, and a clipboard of doom. But these guys weren't joking. They were dead serious. I leaned against the doorframe, folding my arms across my chest. "Okay, so let me get this straight," I said slowly. "You're saying you're police officers?" "HOA police," the leader corrected me firmly, like I'd insulted his rank. "Right," I said. "And you're here to arrest me?" "That's correct," clipboard guy replied quickly, flipping through some pages like he was desperate to show me he'd done his homework. "Your mailbox is non-compliant. You repainted your front door without approval. And," he lowered his voice dramatically as though this was the real crime of the century, "you have illegal patio furniture. I almost lost it right then." Illegal patio furniture. Like I was some sort of patio furniture kingpin running a black market operation out of my backyard. I bit down on the inside of my cheek to keep from laughing, but my eyes were already watering. The leader took a step closer. Sir, you need to step outside for processing. We can do this the easy way, or we can do it the hard way. I raised an eyebrow. Processing? Yeah, Aviators finally spoke up, his voice carrying the bravado of someone who'd probably never been in a real fight. We'll escort you down to the HOA office, and you'll be held until further notice. Held. Like they had a holding cell between the coffee machine and the complaint suggestion box. Uh-huh, I said, nodding slowly. I let a moment of silence hang there. My instincts were firing now, not out of fear, but out of sheer curiosity. Who were these guys? What made them think they could pull this off? And more importantly, how far were they willing to go with their charade? I tilted my head and asked, what happens if I say no? That question must have triggered their inner movie scripts. Because the leader immediately puffed out his chest again, lowered his voice and said, then we'll have no choice but to use force. That was it. I nearly doubled over right then and there. Use force? These guys didn't even have handcuffs. I glanced at their belts. No guns, no tasers, not even pepper spray. The leader had a flashlight. Aviators had nothing but his oversized shades, and Clipboard Guy had, well, a clipboard. What exactly was their plan? Beat me into submission with office supplies? I kept my face neutral, though. I wanted to see how far they'd push it. My heart rate hadn't even spiked. I wasn't in danger. If anything, I was fighting the urge to laugh in their faces. But beneath that, there was a creeping anger, too. Because as absurd as it all was, these guys were still impersonating officers. They were still trying to intimidate me, to force me into compliance. And that wasn't just a bad joke. That was a crime, so I decided to play along. Just a little. All right, I said, my voice calm, almost agreeable. Let me just grab my ID. The three of them visibly relaxed, thinking they had me. Clipboard Guy adjusted his papers. Aviators smirked behind his shades, and the leader nodded like he'd just negotiated a hostage release. I reached into my pocket, pulled out my wallet, and flipped it open. But instead of handing over a driver's license, I revealed something much more real, much more powerful, my FBI badge. Their smug expressions faltered instantly. I held it up just long enough for each of them to see the gold and blue glint in the morning light. Funny thing, I said, my voice suddenly sharp. I actually know a little something about law enforcement. And impersonating a police officer? That's a federal crime. The silence that followed was delicious. Clipboard Guy's jaw dropped. Aviators shifted uncomfortably, his smirk collapsing. And the leader? For the first time since this absurd encounter began, he looked unsure. I didn't smile. I didn't laugh. I just stood there, calm and steady, letting the weight of reality sink. The badge was still in my hand, angled just enough so they could see it clearly. I didn't move, didn't blink. I just let them stew in the moment. And wow, did it land. Clipboard Guy's lips moved like he was trying to form words, but his brain had disconnected the signal. Aviators tilted his head, squinting through those ridiculous oversized shades like maybe, just maybe, my badge was also a prop, like theirs. And the leader, Mr. Plastic Badge, puffed up 1 second and deflated the next. The swagger bleeding right out of him as the reality of what he'd just walked into settled across his face. I finally broke the silence, keeping my tone calm but firm. So, let's run this back. You're here to arrest me. For, what was it again? Clipboard Guy glanced down at his papers like the words might have magically changed. His voice cracked again. No. Non-compliant mailbox, unapproved paint color, and, he swallowed hard, illegal patio furniture. There it was again. Patio furniture. The ultimate neighborhood felony. I wanted to laugh, but I forced my expression to stay locked in that serious federal agent stare. The one that makes perps suddenly rethink every choice that led them to that exact second. Illegal patio furniture, I repeated slowly, like I was tasting the phrase for the first time. Then I tilted my head, narrowing my eyes. And for that, you thought you had the authority to impersonate police officers. Knock down my door? Threaten me with force? The leader's mouth opened, then closed. He finally managed, we're not impersonating. We are the HOA police. The board authorized us, that was it. That was the dumbest thing I'd heard all week. I actually let a chuckle slip, but only for a second. "Buddy," I said, lowering my badge but keeping it visible, "there is no such thing as HOA police. There's neighborhood watch. There's—" Then I decided to twist the knife just a little. "So tell me, when you dreamed this little operation up, what was the plan? Drag me down to the clubhouse? Lock me in the janitor's closet until I begged forgiveness for my patio chairs?" Aviators actually flinched at that, like I'd read his mind. Clipboard guy shuffled his papers again, mumbling something about community service penalties. The absurdity of it all would have been hilarious if it wasn't so dangerous. Because here's the thing, entitled people with imaginary power are unpredictable. You never know how far they'll push it, especially when they think they've got backup. And judging by the way these guys were acting, they thought the whole HOA was behind them. I crossed my arms again, letting the badge glint under the porch light. "Here's the reality," I said firmly. "Right now, the only thing standing between you and a set of handcuffs is my patience. And let me tell you, it's wearing thin." Clipboard guy's voice was barely a whisper. We didn't think it was that serious." I locked eyes with him. "It's serious. Very serious. Do you have any idea how many years you could be looking at for impersonating law enforcement? For attempted unlawful detention? For conspiracy?" Their faces drained even more. I almost felt bad. Almost. The leader tried to recover, throwing his shoulders back like he still had some shred of authority left to flex. We just wanted to do what was right. The HOA gave us permission." That was when I lost the thin thread of restraint holding me back from laughing. I barked out a short laugh, sharp and humorless. "Permission from an HOA doesn't override state law. It doesn't override federal law. You don't get to invent a police force because you're upset about someone's mailbox. That's not how any of this works." I took another step closer. They instinctively stepped back, almost in unison. "So let's get real. Either you explain yourselves right now, or I call the local PD and let them handle you. And trust me, they won't find this funny." Clipboard guy opened his mouth, but the leader cut him off. "We don't need to explain anything to you," he snapped, his voice shaky but defiant. That was it. That was his last card, and he played it badly. I smiled, slow, deliberate, the kind of smile that never reaches your eyes. Wrong answer. I pulled out my phone, thumb hovering over the screen. "You've got about 3 seconds before I make this official." Panic rippled across their faces. Aviators actually reached out a hand as if to stop me, then thought better of it and pulled back. Clipboard guy whispered something like, "Please don't," but it was drowned out by the leader's desperate attempt at control. "Wait," he said quickly. Let's talk about this." I lowered the phone slightly but didn't put it away. "Oh, now you want to talk?" He nodded furiously. "We didn't mean— Look, it wasn't supposed to go this far. We wanted to scare you a little. Get you to comply. That's all. There it was. The truth finally slipping out. They weren't lawmen. They weren't enforcers. They were bullies. Entitled brats with too much free time and too little common sense, playing dress-up to push their neighbors around. I shook my head slowly. "You tried to intimidate me into compliance. You threatened me with force. And you don't think that's serious?" Aviators muttered. "We didn't know you were FBI." I snapped my gaze to him. "You shouldn't need to know who someone is to realize this is wrong. You think it's okay to bully an old lady down the street if she has the wrong curtains? You'd try this with a single mom who painted her door the wrong shade of blue?" The words hit harder than I expected. Aviators looked away. Clipboard guy bit his lip. And the leader, he looked furious, but not at me. At himself. At the fact that his little plan had blown up in his face. I finally lowered my phone completely, though my patience was razor-thin now. "Here's what's going to happen," I said firmly. "I'm giving you one chance to walk away before I involve the real police. One chance. But if I ever see you pulling this stunt again, on me, on any of the neighbors, I won't hesitate. You'll be spending your weekends explaining yourselves in court instead of harassing people about their lawn furniture. Understood?" Clipboard guy nodded so fast his hat almost flew off. Aviators muttered a shaky yes. The leader hesitated, his pride clearly warring with his fear, but eventually, he gave a tight nod too. Good. That was enough for now. I closed my wallet, tucking my badge back inside, and took a step back into my house. "Get off my porch," I said flatly. And for the first time all morning, they listened. They shuffled backward, muttering to each other, their fake authority crumbling into dust with every step. Clipboard Guy clutched his papers like a lifeline. Aviators kept his head down. The leader tried to salvage some dignity, but his plastic badge glinted in the sunlight, reminding everyone just how fake it all was. When they finally reached the sidewalk, I shut my door, locked it, and leaned against it for a moment. Exhaling, I wasn't shaken, not in the slightest. But I was furious, because if they had the gall to try this with me, an FBI agent, what had they done to my other neighbors? Who else had they bullied into compliance with their imaginary HOA police routine? I knew one thing for certain, this wasn't over. I didn't sit long after shutting that door. The whole exchange replayed in my head like a bad comedy sketch that somehow veered into a crime documentary. 3 self-proclaimed HOA police trying to haul me away for the heinous crime of patio furniture. I chuckled under my breath, but then the humor soured quickly. Because here's the ugly truth. These guys weren't just clowning around. They'd been dead serious. If I hadn't flashed my badge, if I hadn't had the training to see through them and hold my ground, they would have tried this stunt with someone else, someone less prepared, someone who might have actually been terrified enough to comply. That thought didn't sit well with me. Not one bit. I grabbed my phone, scrolled to a contact I knew at the local police department, and hit call. The line barely rang before it picked up. "Morning," came the voice on the other end. "Hey, it's me," I said, keeping my tone even. "You got a unit available? Because you're gonna want to swing by my place. I've got 3 wannabe cops impersonating law enforcement. They just tried to arrest me." There was a pause, then a low whistle. "You serious?" "Dead serious." 10 minutes later, I heard the distant wail of sirens. I opened my blinds just enough to see the trio still milling around at the corner of the block. They hadn't gone home. Instead, they were huddled together, arguing in frantic whispers, gesturing wildly with their hands. Clipboard Guy was waving his papers like a white flag. Aviators kept looking back toward my house, and the leader, plastic badge still crooked on his chest, was red-faced, barking orders that no one seemed to be obeying. Then the squad car rolled up, lights flashing. The 3 froze like deer in headlights. The leader actually tried to puff his chest out again, as if he could somehow sell this nonsense to real cops. Spoiler, he couldn't. I stepped outside just as 2 officers got out of the cruiser. The looks on their faces when I explained the situation were priceless, caught somewhere between disbelief and second-hand embarrassment. "You've got to be kidding me," one muttered. "Wish I was," I replied. The officers approached the trio, who immediately started talking over one another in a desperate chorus. Clipboard Guy stammered something about authorized by the HOA. Bored, Aviators tried to argue. They were just enforcing rules. The leader insisted loudly that they had every right to make arrests in the neighborhood. The officers didn't buy a word of it. "Sir," one officer said to the leader, his tone sharp, "do you realize impersonating a law enforcement officer is a felony?" The leader faltered. "We weren't impersonating. We're the HOA police." "Not a thing," the officer shot back. "Never has been, never will be." Clipboard Guy looked like he was about to cry. Aviators had his hands shoved in his pockets, rocking on his heels like he wanted to disappear. "And the leader?" He tried to double down. "You don't get it. The community is falling apart. People breaking the rules left and right. Someone has to enforce order." "Not like this," the officer replied coldly. "You don't get to play dress-up and start detaining people. That's not how the law works." At that point, I couldn't resist stepping in. I walked over slowly, deliberately, letting my badge catch the sunlight as I pulled it from my wallet again. The trio went pale all over again. "Just in case it wasn't clear before," I said, holding it up for the officers to see as well. "I'm with the FBI. These 3 showed up at my door this morning, claimed to be arresting me for HOA violations, and threatened me with force if I didn't comply. They're lucky I decided to call you before I handled it myself." The cops gave me a look, half respect, half disbelief at the sheer stupidity they were dealing with. Then one officer turned back to the trio. "All right, hands behind your backs. All 3 of you." Clipboard Guy immediately obeyed, nearly dropping his precious stack of papers in the process. Aviators hesitated, muttering something about misunderstanding, but the officer had none of it and cuffed him anyway. The leader, though, he tried to resist. "This is harassment," he barked as the officer grabbed his arm. "You can't arrest me. I'm in charge of this neighborhood." The officer twisted his arm behind his back with practiced ease. "You're in charge of nothing, and right now, you're under arrest for impersonating law enforcement and attempted unlawful detention." The leader's face turned crimson. "You can't do this."